Hi guys, so since getting my airbrush at Christmas, I've had some requests from people to do a basic sort of tutorial from a beginner's position on how to get into airbrushing and little tips and things, but what I wanted to do instead is take it from a different angle. So what I wanted to do is try and explain to people how an airbrush works. Hopefully it's not too confusing and hopefully you can follow the video. But the idea is that I explain how an airbrush works and basically demystify it all and arm people into knowing how to maintain the things based on what they do and which part is doing what, basically. Right then, so here is my cheap airbrush. No expenses spared on this bad boy. I couldn't afford anything more expensive than the cheapest of the cheap. I think you can pick these up for probably about tenner on Amazon or eBay. So I wanted to start off with what happens to the air in these things. So as we all know, the air comes up into this part here. So you attach a hose to the bottom there and the air comes through that hose from your compressor into this little valve in the bottom here. Now you press your trigger here and that lets the air in on these dual action ones. Now as you can see, the trigger presses there, that presses down on this little trigger here and that lets air in. This here is your sort of valve. You don't ever need to clean this bit here. This is a self-contained little bit. All good. Right, so where does that air go? Now in this model, the air goes into that little hole that you can see there in the front. So it obviously goes into this part here. Nice and simple, right? So we're going to need to find out where that air ends up in the front, and of course how it comes out when it gets to the end. Right, what I'm quickly going to do is I'm going to take the back off. Now I'm not going to take the whole thing apart. If you want to see airbrushes taken apart, there's thousands of videos on YouTube on stripping down airbrushes. This is basically trying to show you how they work using this one as an example. So we've seen where the air goes when it comes into the airbrush. Now when it gets out to this end of the airbrush, it basically ends up in this dark void here. So there's a small hole at the back of this dark void. You can't see it because I can't get a light in there, but I assure you down at the back there is actually a small hole. So it's travelled up here and ended up in this sort of chamber that surrounds this central shaft, if you will, that comes up the middle. Now on the end of the airbrush, I'm just going to take this apart. It's just the needle guard that I'm taking off. You have this part here. What this part here does is it takes the air that's coming up into that chamber that's going around that central shaft and it funnels it through this tiny little hole that you can see there. So that's it, basically its purpose. So what the air comes up into here, goes through into this chamber, so the chamber is there to basically circulate it around and cause the pressure to go all the way around the central shaft, which actually holds the needle, which travels all the way from the back end to the front of the airbrush. And then this part here goes around this here, which is your nozzle, and pushes all the air out of the end. So I'm just going to get some cloth here to show you, or rather to help me show you, and focus the camera right on the end of the airbrush. If I can just get this to work. Where am I? There we are. So as you can see, the hole in the middle of that hole has got the nozzle. So the air is actually only coming out of this circle around the outside of the nozzle. And of course the nozzle is where the paint comes from. Now, what's stopping the paint coming out of that nozzle just constantly the whole time you've got your air coming out of there? Because of course air, as it's shooting out of there, would be causing the paint to get sucked out, because that's basically what it does. Well, that's where our needle comes in. So I've just loosened the needle at the back end here. I'm just going to poke it through. There we go. And what we've done there is we've used that needle to block that hole. So our needles block the hole, and then when we use the trigger and pull it back like that, what we're doing is we're slowly letting paint, more paint, out of that hole. And that's basically what that does. And that's the sole purpose of that. So pressing down on the trigger lets air out of that ring around the nozzle, and then pulling back on the dual action airbrush lets air out of the hole, which is atomized and blasted into that air which is going around that circle. So that's basically how the dual action airbrush works. So now we understand how the thing works, more or less. I'm just going to put this back together because it's annoying me. I'm going to try and basically explain which bits get wet. So your paint goes in here, of course. Now the paint basically coats your needle, which you can see down the bottom there. So your needle runs obviously from the back to the front and pokes out the end. And the needle is completely coated in paint. There's a little seal here which stops the paint going backwards along the needle, which is very important because, of course, if the paint came back along the needle, it'd start clogging up all these innards here, which of course includes your trigger, and then you've got the bit which the trigger presses against here, which you can see moving there. In fact, you can see it better if I pull on this bit here. There we go. And then you've got this part here which tensions and holds the spring in place. You can see that there. That basically allows me to control how stiff the trigger is. And then you've got the part here which clamps onto the needle itself. So by loosening this, I can move the needle freely and stab myself in the finger over there. So what gets wet? So nothing from this seal here backwards should be getting wet, which is important because all of this here is lubricated. Some of it might have grease on it to keep it working nicely. So all of this here is nice and clean, nice and dry. Awesome. Doesn't need cleaning basically half as often as anything else. If you clean it once in a blue moon, that'll be it really, and that's only really to maintain the grease and any lube that you've got on it basically. Now what does need cleaning is anything that your needle touches. Now what's important here is this on the end here. So the needle protrudes here. I'm just going to drag it back so I don't damage it, because I am again going to start pulling this apart. Now the inside here, all the inside here and the inside of this bit here, you should never see paint on the inside here. If you've got paint on the inside of this and around the outside of your nozzle, something's gone wrong. I've never seen paint on the inside of this. I've seen paint on the outside because, of course, I just quickly put this back together. That's where your paint's coming out. It's coming out there, but there's so much air coming out from around the circle around the outside of this that no paint would go inside that gap. It just shouldn't. So you should never see any paint in any of these workings here, and so there should be no need to clean them basically. And again on the outside of the nozzle, because that's part of those workings. Now the inside of the nozzle may get some dried paint on it, and of course that's where the paint comes through, and so that will need to be cleaned. There are special tools that you can clean. Some people use the end of their needle to clean the inside of the nozzle. That will need cleaning. Some people clean the inside of here, though in my experience, just basically blowing cleaner or water through the airbrush itself is enough to clean this pipe here. Of course, that pipe there is basically what the needle travels through. Sorry, just not the camera there. So with that in mind, rather than pulling the needle out the back of my airbrush, because as we discussed, there's a seal here. If I've got a dirty needle, this end of my needle's dirty, I really don't want to be dragging it through this part of my airbrush. That would be silly. So instead, what I actually do, so we focus that, otherwise it's going to be driving you guys nuts when I want to clean my needle, I actually push it, ow, just stabbed myself a few times. I push it out the front of the airbrush like that, and I clean it out the front. So whether I'm using paper towel or anything special, I actually clean it out the front, and then what I can do, just push it back out the back of the airbrush further than I need to, so it's safe, and then I can reconstruct, looking for the pieces around the camera, can reconstruct the front of the airbrush without needing to worry about the needle getting in the way, like that. So the outside of this needs cleaning, that will get paint on it. The inside and the outside of that will get paint on it, because you'll be removing it to clean the needle. And of course the inside of the cup, and I've just shown you how to clean my needle. So basically, just to reiterate, as long as you haven't got a problem with this seal here, you shouldn't be getting any crud or any paint coming back through the back half of your airbrush. If you are, I think you're having problems. In my experience, in my humble opinion. I hope I'm not going to get any backlash from any experienced airbrushers. I'm not sure if that was a problem that used to happen with airbrushes. Like I say, this is a cheap ass airbrush. If I've got a cheap ass airbrush and I'm not having any problems with any paint going backwards into the mechanical part of the airbrush where all these workings are, and you guys are, then I think your expensive airbrushes are letting you down. So that's basically what I wanted to show you guys in a nutshell. Hopefully you've learned something. Hopefully airbrushes make a lot more sense to you now. Hopefully you'll feel a lot more inclined to buy one and understand what you're using. And in my experience, when you understand what you're using, you can apply a lot more common sense to maintaining things. And I don't know, to me, when I get something new, I pull the thing apart over and over and over until it makes more sense to me than anything in the world. And from there, I start maintaining it in a way that makes sense to me, rather than based on what people tell me in videos and things. It's a good starting point to hear what people say in manuals and things, but once you actually fully understand how something works, then you can really gauge how to maintain something. Right, it's just my humble opinion. Hopefully that's helped some people, and like I say, hopefully it's going to help some people to pick one up, and especially a cheap one like this, just a tenner. You can get it in a kit. I think this was 40 quid with a ridiculously cheap, ridiculously loud airbrush compressor. So if you're going to get a kit like this, the really cheap ones, you're going to have to get somewhere where you're not going to upset your family, your neighbours, somewhere away from anything that's going to be bothered by noise. That's the only downside to these cheap compressors, really, as far as I can tell. Apart from not being able to tell what PSI you're using, is the noise, really. That's as far as I can tell is one of the downsides, one of the major downsides to the cheap stuff. Right, I'm having an absolute blast with this thing, and I just wanted to express that and try and help, to be honest. Like I say, I've not seen any videos with this sort of information on it. I've seen stripping videos, cleaning videos, that sort of thing, but no one's actually gone through how the damn things work. And I think it's really useful information in knowing how to handle the things and knowing how to keep them, basically. Right then, keep up with me over here on these things between videos, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Stay well, guys.